Welcome to the Old Guy AI podcast, brought to you by MongoDB. And now, here's Scott Sanchez and Pete Johnson.
Hello there. I'm Pete Johnson, and with me as always, my good friend Scott Sanchez. And Scott, since we're going to talk about Apple today, the icebreaker is Jobs or Was?
I mean, it's got to be Jobs. I don't know what else to say. You? You a
Well,
Woz fan? Not that I'm anti-Woz, but like, come on, Jobs. There you go. I was.
I brought a prop for my answer. That's the first computer I ever touched, what he's holding right there in this picture. The thing for me about Jobs is he was many parts visionary and some parts toxic person. And everybody thinks that that means if you're toxic, that you also magically become a visionary. And those two things aren't necessarily related versus, a guy that took his windfall, started teaching at De Anza College and playing Segway polo.
Segway polo. There is something in this industry in general about brilliant jerks, and we've all come across them. I've heard Jobs described that way, and I don't know. I think there's a time and a place for it, but if I had to pick, I'm probably going Steve every time, despite the potential brilliant jerk status.
Well, then
I do miss him in the keynote.
So yesterday,
I will, yeah.
Yeah, I think everybody misses him in the keynotes. And speaking of that, so we're recording this on Wednesday, September 10th, the day after the big set of Apple announcements. What was it that resonated with you most out of that set of announcements yesterday?
I think what was missing most for me in the Apple announcement was anything interesting around AI from an end user perspective. Like clearly they made a bunch of hardware and like core model innovations that they talked about and have started to share, and we'll talk about some of those today. But like, other than some basic implementations of AI into the user experience, all the stuff they talked about a year ago that they promised and sold us hardware on, and like Apple Intelligence and all this stuff, like, where did that go? What happened to that? And so it was like very obviously missing for me. And I even went back and like watched some of the replay. I was like, did I miss it? No, there's just really, there was nothing in there. It was like they sort of forgot about all of that, or hoped we all forgot about all of that. How about you? What stood out for you?
Well, I think we've already established if there's one of us that's going to do some side reading, it's me. And I did do some side reading on the Apple Intelligence. And in particular, what I liked yesterday was the live translate. So that comes in several forms. I think you've already got some experience with it, using it on text, because I think you're using the iOS 26 beta, but now they extended it to voice, and not just voice, but also to the new AirPods. I'll get into some of the detail on that in a minute, but that was the one that resonated for me.
Yeah, but it's also not innovative. I mean, doing it maybe on the AirPods live is cool because it'll be sort of so seamless. I am enjoying it on the text, talking to different people. Instead of me having to use my broken Spanish, maybe I can just flip it so they can text me in Spanish and I text them in English, and it just does it for me, and it's seamless. And it seems like that is also how it will work with the AirPod implementation, which is great. But it's also not the first device or first thing that's doing live translation. This little company called Google that also has this built into their phones and can do things like that. So I don't know, like I have maybe unrealistic expectations of a company that has that much money available and spends that much money on innovation, and it was underwhelming.
Well, if you scratch below the surface, the thing that impressed me, and I'll put this in the description of this episode, the model that they're using for live translation is compressed down to 2 bits per weight. And they're using some new technology that they're calling quantization aware training. So before I get into those details, let me define quantization for folks that might not be familiar and explain why it's important in the AI space. So whether you're using a model or a vector database, there's this constant balancing act that the model providers and the vector databases are playing here, where on one hand, you've got the quality of the retrieval, and on the other hand, you've got space. And by space, I don't mean disk space, I mean space in the memory for either the GPUs that are inferencing the model or the CPUs that you might be using for the vector database. The main tool that these providers have at their disposal for compacting that is quantization. So really quantization is a fancy AI-specific term for compression. Generally speaking, when you either generate those vector embeddings or you generate the weights on the models, you typically do that at full fidelity with 32-bit floating point. And you can quantize that down to 16-bit, down to 8-bit integer, or even down to binary, which is what Apple has done here with this model, where they've got it down to 2 bits per weight so that they can fit that model in the memory of those new 5 core GPUs on that new A19 chip.
Well, first, let me say that was an excellent explanation of the technology. Thank you. For those of us that didn't read the paper, as usual. But I'll give you a yes and. Like, yes, that's very innovative from Apple to be able to squeeze this stuff down to the point where it can run on that hardware. They did also make a comment about, like, this is MacBook Pro level performance on your iPhone now. And if that's the case, maybe it's not quite so innovative that they've like been able to squeeze it down quite so much if they're packing a MacBook Pro into my pocket. But still, great to see them innovating sort of at the model level. But the end result is we're talking about like milliseconds worth of improvement in the user experience over something that Google Translate has had for free for years. And I don't know that it's worth me going out and spending $1,400 on a new phone to do that unless like I literally spend my day using Live Translate. Like if that's the feature that's going to sell me, great. But like for $1,400, I'll wait half a second to get the response back from the cloud, because it's pretty good today. I don't know. Like again, it for me, it comes back to like, yes, cool. Seems like they're doing some nice stuff at the hardware level and like at the underlying model level, but how that's getting expressed to me in features that will like fundamentally transform how I use this device or the value I get from this device isn't there yet. And maybe we're just still on that curve. Maybe I'm in the trough of disillusionment. I don't know, but Apple, I expect more.
Well, in fairness, I think a lot of people are in that same trough of disillusionment. I mean, anytime they have one of those announcements, you can play the drinking game of lightest iPhone ever, most durable iPhone ever. Like there's the lines that they use every single time. But I was impressed with what they put under the hood, even if it just gets them even with what Google's been doing with the TPUs on their devices. But I was happy with the precedent that it sets, that they're positioning themselves in a way that they're kind of learning how to do the models in this specific use case. And I think that learning will help them when they want to do other things besides Live Translate in the future. So for example, if you look under the covers of that A19 Pro chip, I've got the diagram up here right in front of me. So it's a 5 GPU core, 2nd generation dynamic caching. It's got some neural accelerators that are 3 times faster than the A18 Pro. So I liked the comment that they made about the MacBook Pro now in your pocket. But really Apple's kind of come full circle here, right? Where for so many years, the x86 architecture so dominated every little corner of computing. And now you've got all kinds of companies who are doing their own custom silicon. And really this is I think a major moment for the Apple Silicon program, that they're able to do some of this stuff in a way that they couldn't before when they were getting their chips from other places. And in a similar way, we're seeing OpenAI go out and create a partnership with, I think it was Qualcomm, or no, it was Broadcom, to start to do some of their own custom GPUs, so that they're not as reliant on NVIDIA. So these things always come full circle where, okay, we're going to standardize on a platform and now everybody uses it. But then there comes a use case where you need something specific and companies go and build their own thing. And now we're seeing it down with the silicon for some of these edge AI use cases.
Yeah, as Apple was describing what was inside the new iPhone Air, which looks both beautiful and fragile at the same time, but it's the most durable iPhone ever made. I The one thing there that stood out to me was that I think now every major chip in there is theirs, right? Like the core processor, the GPUs, the wireless chips, the like all of it now, the modem, everything in there seems to be Apple designed and produced. And I'm sure there's some stuff they're still sourcing from other people, but like all the main components, like I don't know, the memory, are they still buying memory and storage from somebody else? Um, but everything else, certainly the power hungry stuff, is all theirs. And their ability to continue to push on that has been impressive. Even if that's not translating to a better AI powered experience for me in the operating system.
Well, let me throw some other statistics at you that just in my lifetime, what we've seen. So I was born about 6 months after the moon landing. Okay, so the moon landing's July 69. I'm born in February of 70. So the most sophisticated mobile computer in the world when I was born was the lunar lander. And it had, I'm looking at so the Apollo guidance computer had a custom 16-bit architecture that ran at 1 megahertz. It had 4K of RAM, 36K of ROM. The iPhone 1, so going back to 2007, had 128 megs of RAM. So over that period between 1970 and 2007, because of Gordon Moore and Moore's law, the iPhone 1 was 402 times faster, 32,000 more RAM, and 273 times lighter.
And now the processor that runs just the refresh rate on my watch is more powerful than that entire spaceship.
Indeed. And in between, I sent you this picture. I sent you this picture earlier in the week. That's the computer I took to college in the fall of 1988, and it had a 20 meg hard drive. And that's what I learned. I got a computer science degree with that computer. And now every single app on my TV is 20 times that size.
Hence, we're living up to our name here of the Old Guy AI podcast for sure, with these throwbacks. Do we think that Apple is going to continue to lean into other people's models, right? Like obviously they innovated quite a bit on the translation and some of the other work to build that out and pare it down. But when you look at the capability of a MacBook in your pocket, of a 2 terabyte drive, 2 terabytes of storage in your phone now, yes, you could argue a lot of that's for video production or other things that people need it for, where they don't want to bolt on an SSD to the back of their phone. But like, do you think that we will see better partnerships over the next months and quarters, or at WWDC next year, where they will lean into having other model providers take a more prominent place on the phone through partnerships like they've done with gaming and some of the other areas that have taken advantage of the hardware in ways that Apple maybe initially thought they were going to do, but then went more the partnership and collaboration route. You think we'll see that with AI?
I think that's certainly one of the ways it could play out. So to be clear, this live translation model is theirs, and that surprised me that they went out and still did their own model. But if you think about, does an LLM local to the phone, does that become a core part of the OS at some point, where all the different applications that might be running on your phone and they need an LLM to help make decisions, you have a choice. Can you do you architecturally, do you run it on the phone, using some of this heavy quantization, or do you rely on the cell signal or your Wi-Fi to go phone home to whatever LLM might be running in the cloud or wherever else? There's an argument to be made to run it on the phone, but if you're going to run it on the phone, you got to run one for all the different apps that might need to use it. There are folks out there who are trying to take like Llama 4 and use some quantization and make it so that you could run it on the A19 Pro in a way that makes it usable. And then what you would have is a general purpose LLM that any application could use locally. Now, whether it ends up being Llama 4 or something else, or if they have, there's been lots of talk of this emerging partnership that they have with Google. There's lots of different ways they could do this. It might even be something. It would be cool if that's something that you, the user, could choose. If you were a sophisticated enough user that it mattered to you, which one do you want to run? And here's like 3 choices, where it becomes a choice, just like your background color or your lock screen photo or something like that. It would. It's not clear to me which of those extremes we might run into, but in the case where it makes sense to run it on the phone, it makes sense to bake it into iOS and to make it so that all the different applications that you have running on your phone would all take advantage of the same LLM. Instead of having multiple applications all trying to run their own LLM, they're going to run out of resources very quickly that way.
What you just described is exactly what they sold us on with Apple Intelligence, that there would be a core underlying intelligence that had access to all of your application data based on permissions and could give you this central way to interact with your phone and your data and your applications and everything all together centrally through this intelligence. And a year later, we basically heard nothing about it. We heard about how powerful the hardware is without actually hearing about what they're doing with it now in any meaningful way. And I don't know, it raises the question for me of, is their model going to be, hey, we're releasing a new, API that with the user permission, you can download an app, you can download Gemini now and load it on your iPhone and give it permission, and it it will be able to take control at a low level and interact with your data and your apps and all of that on our super, super powerful, fully integrated hardware stack. Again, sort of relating it back to what they've done with games, where they exposed parts of the hardware to these gaming companies that lets them really, really take advantage of it in a much more powerful way. I don't know. I feel like to have a whole year go by and nothing material that they've shared with us yet, it just leads me to have a lot of questions about what their strategy is.
Well, let me ask it this way, because the way you and I have worked for years is I'm the one that would read the white paper and get excited about 2-bit weight quantization, and you tend to have a better angle on some of the business use cases. And sometimes we meet in the middle. There's an overlap in that Venn diagram of our interests and skills that we can at least have conversations. But let me ask it to you this way. What set of circumstances do you think led to them not having the announcement that you wanted to hear out of Apple Intelligence yesterday? Do you think it was the talent bleed that was very public that they had? Do you think they underinvested in some of the models above and beyond this language model that's at the core of the Live Translate? Or do you think it's something else?
I think they got so much heat over the way they launched and subsequently failed at delivering on Apple Intelligence that they have to be somewhat gun shy now about getting it right. And so rather than like trickle us in with a little bit of like, hey, this stuff we promised you a year ago, we didn't really deliver on any of that. But now we're going to give you 20% of that we got good at. I think they just like put it under the pillow and they're like, okay, cool. Let's talk about the hardware. Let's talk about the things that we have done. We have Live Translate. We have these things now. Great. Um, while they still continue to either quietly work on it, and it's taking them longer than they expected for a bunch of reasons, or that they are shifting gears in some way as a business strategy to go more of a exposing the underlying APIs and structures and hardware so that they can partner with other people. And there was a Sam Altman tweeted X. Sam Altman posted on X that he was surprised by how innovative. I'm paraphrasing. Like the iPhone Air was really impressive to him, and made him want to go out and get one. And someone commented, someone followed up on that post saying like, yeah, but it would be great if they had some of the capabilities of OpenAI voice mode and other things in there. And he was like, yeah, I'd love to see that. Right. Um, I don't know if that's foreshadowing anything, but I do think that like these things that we can get for free or $20 a month from OpenAI and Google and others are just so far beyond what we're getting from Apple. And I think it's more business strategy at this point than technical strategy.
I see where you're going with that. And we kind of talked about this in an earlier episode that now there's like half a dozen different ways that you can get a better Siri than Siri now. And some of them are free and some of them are, between $20 a month, or I'm on the max plan for Anthropic. So, mine's a little bit more expensive than that, but I get an experience that cuts across my desktop, my phone, my coding experience. I get it across all of those things. I think if they are going to make a splash with this, it has to be something similar to what you described in an earlier episode, where it has to be very agentic. Like, I want to be able to say, hey, go look at the invite for the event that I was just invited to. And because you're iOS, you already know how to log into my preferred airline. You already know how to log into my preferred hotel partner. You already have access to my entire schedule uh, through calendar for the next 4 weeks. Like, go, go create a couple of options for me for what this trip might be. And after I see those options, I pick one and it goes and books it for me. I always go back to the travel one because that's kind of the biggest pain point in my life right now is whenever you and I have to go to different events, is how do you organize that around your personal life, and how do you organize that around, how long do I want a layover to be, and do I get an aisle, and do I get that upgrade, and all that kind of stuff. It's sufficiently more complicated than asking Siri for the weather, which is something that's all my dad uses Siri for is, hey, it tells me the weather. It's more complicated than that, but it's not so complicated that the data sources, they're all present on that right now. So it ought to have access to all the data sources. So I want a travel agent on my phone that's built into the OS that handles all those kinds of things. And if you were going to have an agentic experience like that, presumably it would be able to be pluggable that you could solve other use cases above and beyond that travel one. But to me, that's the one that's more complicated than, even what I'll use Claude on the phone for. Hey, go do this research for me while I'm at the optometrist, and when I get back, I've got something that I can then do the manual work for. It's got to be something like that. What would cross that bar for you?
Certainly travel is something that a lot of people feel that pain on, and like you said, the data sources are there. I just kind of keep coming back to, is Apple's game plan to sort of get out of the business of trying to solve all those problems for us, and instead making it easier to expose the software and the data and the hardware capabilities. So, you think about the simple example of like, you install some app and it's like, hey, now we have reasonably granular control over things like, do you want this app to have access to your photo library? Should it only be selected photos? Do you want it to have access to your calendar? Should it be read-only? Should it have the ability to add? Can it change, right? Like that granularity has appeared from some of the core Apple apps. And you could imagine that in the coming releases that we will start to see the ability for, Delta to have that same kind of plugin through the Apple integration, that when you install something else, I'll go back to Gemini or something else, you install the Gemini app, and it's like, hey, we can agentically book your travel for you. Would you like to give us access? We notice you have the Delta app on your phone. Would you like to give us access to, your flight data and your travel bookings so that we can do that for you? And Apple gives them access to the underlying chips and hardware so that they can run their small models, and they can run other things, and they can do that on device. Like, that is a very realistic approach for them to take, rather than trying to be the best at all of that. And it'll probably be somewhere in the middle. They're building their own models for language translation instead of saying, hey, go use Google Translate. But are there other things that they're going to lean on that ecosystem of app developers to go do? I kind of hope it's somewhere in the middle, because there are going to be people more innovative or with a more compelling offer than Apple for some of those agents, rather than like just being in that walled garden that Apple makes available to us. But they are going to have to make it easier and more secure and more granular to expose that underlying functionality of the other apps we're logged into, your bank, your all of the other apps where your life exists.
So maybe where it goes, the precedent here to me is what they do with Apple Health, right? I can have, whether it's the app I use that's connected to my scale, or if I'm tracking my exercise, or if I'm tracking my calorie intake, I can set up all those applications so that they home run the data in Apple Health for me, and they use that as a proxy to share all that data. And that then becomes a trusted data source for all those applications, so that they don't have to handle the data brokering in some other way. It's like a central part that's built into the OS. So even if they don't have the agent, if they have the model and they have the data there, then all these other app providers could more easily build agents that could take care, that could get data out of that data brokerage, where it's, if I give this agent permission to everything that's in, the data that's on my phone, it becomes very similar to how that Apple Health works today. That seems, as we're talking through it, that seems to me to be a good precedent to follow for not just health data, but any data you might have on your phone, so that an agent could take advantage of it.
The health example is a good one, because it's much more granular than what they had for calendar or photos or other things. So I think that does definitely fit the bill. I think what's different here is that instead of only being the data broker, and Apple Health is sort of the central repository for that these apps can read and write to, depending on what granular access you give them. We're also talking about, like, Delta, back to that example, would have to expose their API for how to run a search, or how to do a booking, or how to change a flight, or whatever it is, or Marriott Bonvoy, or whoever it is, if we're still talking about travel, and Hertz and all of these people who sort of make up your travel components would have to expose their underlying functionality that the app provides. Maybe there's some like local MCP server that runs. I don't know, but like there is a model here where, no pun intended, MCP. There's a model here where that functionality is exposed in a sort of hybrid local way, that something else running on that machine, provided by Apple or provided by a third party, can access it and provide that more complete experience. And I don't think that we're far off from it being realistic. Like there are startups, probably dozens or 100 startups at this point, doing that kind of work already, that have products in market. This isn't science fiction at this point, but because of still how walled the garden is on our phones for a bunch of reasons, it's still very, very hard to do. You still have to like oauth your way into giving access to these third parties through their websites or through their apps, to like, and not a lot of people want to do that yet. But if I can run it locally and feel like it's protected and secure and granularly controlled, that would be great. If I can do it with Apple's help or with their facilitation, even better.
Okay, you had me at MCP. You know what a fan I am of the Model Context Protocol. So, like, what we're beginning to describe here is, if I've got a model that I can choose, just like I can choose my lock screen as to which version of a model I might run locally. And if I could have a set of locally running MCP servers that are, I could use I could use the Face ID to authenticate with and refresh that auth token, so that then the MCP server could reuse that auth token for talking to whatever the backend API is. I could then pick which tools of that MCP server I would like to make available to whatever this big agent is, that then becomes like this plus version of what they have with health data today, that would then enable an agent developer of some kind to then go in and make use of all those tools, not have to worry about authenticating with the individual APIs, not having to worry about the locally running model, that if that's built into the OS or if that's built into some kind of agentic platform that runs on the phone, that's the kind of thing that could then start to help take off. So I think we just gave them a product roadmap for iOS 27 and the next version of Apple Intelligence. Well done.
Apple, are you listening? This is the kind of innovative stuff that we hoped for yesterday, and you didn't deliver. But we've just handed it to you on a silver platter. And if you're not going to do it, Google, please, come on, let's go. I don't know how much more there is to say. We've just created the business model for the next $1 trillion worth of growth for one of those two companies.
Yeah, that's a good place to end. Now, you and I are going to be in the same physical place next week for the first time in about 9 months, and we may or may not be able to get a live in-person podcast going. We'll have to see how the week ends up going. But thanks so much, everyone, for watching. Like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.
This has been the Old Guy AI Podcast. Views expressed here do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the sponsors or the employers of any hosts or guests.